30 years. All right. Indianapolis in here? What about Gary? Chicago in the building? All right. Detroit? All right.
LA?
Los Angeles. I just came from there.
I know.
Wow. New York? Okay, let me find out. South Bend is the new mecca of black consciousness.
Let's go, baby.
We getting there. Okay. Because when I landed at the airport, I didn't know if I should look for horses or cows. And I'm always careful when I come through these Indiana streets because I know the history of Indiana with black folks. In fact, this is a state that should have probably been in the South when you look at its history. Many of the most notorious lynchings occurred in Indiana. Not to mention, this is the first state to legally endorse forced sterilization. Okay, Indiana was the leading state to start taking people's ability to reproduce themselves without their consent. So Indiana has a very notorious history. But we as black people have a history that we have to go back and take a look at and find out where we got it wrong. You know, we often look at our history for celebratory purposes. And there's nothing wrong with looking at history for celebratory purposes. But you also have to look at history for instructional and strategic and militaristic purposes. In other words, how did we get from the pyramids to the projects? That's something that our children need to understand. How do we go from glory to gangsterism? It's important that the children understand that. And too often, we leave our children with a lot of unanswered questions because they end up saying to themselves, if we were that great, how did we get here? And we haven't been doing a good enough job helping them to understand it. And you have to connect the dots. Because if you do not connect the dots, then the children will make the assumption that the history must have been exaggerated and white people are in charge simply because they're better. So it's important that we connect those dots. When we look at the past 50 or 60 years or so, we know exactly how we got here. When we look at the death of Malcolm, and then we look at the death of Dr. King, and even Fred Hampton still further, and Medgar Evers before all three of them, and of course the Emmett Till lynching, which was a reaction to the school desegregation decision of 1954. But we have to look at the 1970s because so much of the foundation for the neo-colonization of the black community was laid in the 1970s. The 1970s was the first decade when black people really started thinking you were American. At no other point in our history in this country did we really feel like we were a part of it. But in the 1970s, when they started letting us go to white schools, and in the 1970s, when they started letting us move into white suburbs, and in the 1970s, when they started giving us token positions in white corporations and within the business structure, we started thinking we were a part of America. But we didn't pay attention to the way in which systemic racism was reinventing herself. And one of the first things she did in the 1970s, right here in Indiana, like she did in Detroit, Chicago, LA, back home in Philadelphia, is she first sought to make the black man economically irrelevant to the black woman. And this is important because some of our young people are getting swept up into this feminism thing, which is a white woman's thing. It has nothing to do with you. But we love to grab onto stuff white folks make up. Anything they come up with, we want to outdo them. Okay? So they wanted to make the black man economically irrelevant to the black woman as a prelude to the destruction of the black family. And let us be clear, the destruction of the black family is the goal. Not just the destruction of the man, not just the masculinization of the woman, not just to remove the black child from the home, but to prevent reproduction. That's the goal. The black family unit is the target. So when we fight as men and women in public with each other, all we do is play into an agenda. Okay? They want to destroy the family, but they will make the black woman think all they want is the man. We're going to leave you and your children alone. We just want him. Or they'll make the black man think we just want to co-opt your black woman psychologically and use her for our purposes. Or we just want to brainwash your children so they can work for us for the rest of their lives. No. It's not just about taking the man, taking the woman, taking the child. It's about preventing the reproduction of the species altogether. 1970 was the decade when the economic landscape of black America would be changed permanently by doing what? De-industrializing Gary, Indiana. De-industrializing South Bend. De-industrializing Indianapolis. De-industrializing Fort Wayne. De-industrializing Chicago, Detroit. Even in Philadelphia, you can walk and see where there used to be factories and manufacturing plants. You see this in Chicago and Detroit. You see it even here in South Bend. And in many cases, some of the same factories that once employed black men are now used to incarcerate them. They turn the factory into a prison. Look at the irony there. The same place that kept me out of jail by giving me a livable wage job is now being used to keep me in jail. Interesting. And so once they took away the industrial sector from the inner city and shipped it to the suburbs or to other countries, they then went into the high schools and took out all the industrial building trade programs. This whole thing of everybody in the black community going to college after they graduate from high school like it's a rite of passage is a fairly recent thing. It's only about 40 years old. Never before in the black community did you automatically go to college just because you graduated from high school. That's a new thing that was promoted by the government and the banking industry to make billions off of black people thirsty for an opportunity to do better. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But nobody bothered to tell us that after you get that college education, once the year 2000 comes around, the millennium, you won't be able to find a job. There's over 2 million unemployed African Americans with master's and doctorate degrees right now. I regularly get emails from lawyers and engineers looking for work. White America doesn't hire black people. The government hires black people. Most middle-class blacks are government employees. Fire, teacher, civil service job, police, city worker. White corporations don't hire black people. The government knows this. So the government had to deliberately falsify a black middle class. There's really no such thing as a black middle class. Because class traditionally speaks to one's ownership of wealth and resources. Black people don't own no wealth and resources. When we got out of slavery, 13th Amendment, 1865, we owned 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. Right now, 156 years later, you still only own 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in America. A century and a half with all your athletes, all your football, your basketball, your R&B singers, your performers. 156 years later, you still stuck at 1/2 of 1% of all the wealth in this country. Slavery is one's inability to exercise control over your destiny. Ultimately, that's what slavery is. And because during the Ma'afa, we were not able to control our destiny, we ended up over-depending on God for divine intervention. I understood that over-dependence in the 1600s. I understood that over-dependence in the 1700s. I understood that over-dependence in the 1800s. I understand why we waited on God because we were not allowed to do anything else. Until people like Sojourner Truth and Martin Delaney and Frederick Douglass and others decided that maybe we're going to have to do something first before God steps in. But I understood the over-dependence. I don't understand it now, though. I don't understand it now. Because there's no chains about your wrists or your feet. But you still don't do anything progressively independent for yourself. We are a $2 trillion people. What do we have to show for it? Despite all the racism, we cannot use that as an excuse for why there's not a single independent black community in the United States of America. Not one that has the four essential institutions. Bank to invest in the people, school to teach the people, hospital to save the people, supermarket to feed the people. And I'm going to say manufacturing sector to employ the people. Why we don't have a black town nowhere in America? Why there's no little Africa? I find Chinatowns everywhere. Little Italy everywhere. Even Cambodia everywhere. Why is it that every ethnic group in America has a town of their own, at least one, somewhere in this country? You don't have none, and you've been here longer than everybody else. Yes, racism plays a role. That's true. But your own self-hate and abject neglect of your own responsibilities is the other part. One thing slavery did to the Negro is it made you comfortable having no power over your existence. Slavery made us comfortable having no control. And to this very day, we're still comfortable having no control. As long as I got a Benz, I'm straight. Cell phone, I'm straight. White girlfriend, I'm straight. You know how you brothers do anything other than a black woman. You don't care what it is. Just don't let it be a black woman. Campbell Asian, she could look Mediterranean, Greek. You don't even know her damn nationality. You just happy she not black. And then you want to lie to Dr. Umar and say you can't help who you fall in love with. Well, we know that's a lie. Because up until the Supreme Court decision, Loving versus Virginia of 1968-69, when the Supreme Court struck down all anti-miscegenation marriage laws in America, the black man had no problem staying away from the white woman because it'd turn you into strange fruit. So for almost 400 years, you had no problem staying away from the white woman. But the minute the Supreme Court blew the whistle, you have been chasing white girls more than any other man of any other ethnicity put together marries outside of their race. You cannot blame that on chance. Let me say it again. Most black men do not marry out their race. That's true. But of the educated and the economically sophisticated amongst us, we marry outside more than the men of any other community. Nobody has the snow bunny crisis more than you Negroes. And I know for a fact it's rooted in slavery. And let me be clear, I'm not against the white woman. I'm not. I have no issue with her at all. My issue is the survival of the black family. That's the issue. I understand that black women are the last married and the first divorced. I understand that if our children don't see examples of healthy black love, they will not want to emulate it themselves. It is not about hating nobody. My message has never been about hate. I didn't become a psychologist to hate. I became a psychologist to heal. And believe it or not, I work with every race under the sun, but my priority is my own people. And I say that unapologetically. And your Bible can't convince me otherwise. Your Quran can't convince me otherwise. Your religion has no authority over my right to stand in defense of African people. I want to be very clear about that. Because too many of us like to use religion as an excuse for why we can't do what's best for our own people. Nowhere in the Bible does it say you can't fight for black folks. Nowhere in the Quran does it say you can't fight for black folks. That's just a lie you made up because you ain't got the guts or the love to serve your own people. If the religion ain't helping us, get rid of it. There is no neutral. You are either for black independence or you are against it. There is no middle ground. What good is a religion that tells you you have to die in order to get to heaven? But when I look around Indiana, the white man got his heaven right now on earth. Chinese got their heaven right now on earth. Mexicans got their heaven right now on earth. So if everybody else can get their heaven on earth, so can I. I want my heaven here and now. Don't tell me I got to die to experience it. Because by teaching our children you got to die to get to heaven, you're automatically making them complicit in their own oppression. Just sit by and let everybody else run your life until you die. That's not service to God. That's service to the devil. God didn't put you here to be second class to nobody or second fiddle to nobody. God knew what God was doing when God made you black and your head nappy and your hips wide and your nose broad. Amazingly, black people are always trying to look like they're not black, and you're the only people who cannot hide. You're the only go to a meeting and you start talking about race and you get some Negro to pop up and say, well, I'm not all black. I have everything in my family. I'm part Italian, part Irish, part Russian, Native American, indigenous, sovereign. But when you look in the mirror, you see Negro. When the police pull you over, they see a black man or black woman. It's ridiculous to exaggerate all these other strengths of blood you got in your body. When the last time you saw a white person running around Indiana bragging about the black in their veins? You don't never see white folks bragging about that great black grandfather they had. They keep it to themselves. You find out you got a little bit of this or a little bit of that, you act like you hit the damn lottery. Want to change your name? Some damn Raheem Slurbanowski or some shit. No. Brothers and sisters, in the 1970s, they deindustrialized us. After they took out the factories, they went into the high schools and took out the industrial building trades. That's right, they came to Gary and Indianapolis and South Bend and Fort Wayne, and they said, they don't need that plumbing program no more, take it out. Those black kids don't need that auto mechanic program, take it out. They don't need that electric shop no more, take it out. The carpentry, take it out. The welding, take it out. But leave them with the barber shops and the cosmetology shops because they overly interested in that. They spend $30 billion a year on weave, perm, and beauty. And why do black people spend more than $30 billion a year on weave, perm, and beauty? Because the white man convinced you for 4 years that you're the ugliest thing on earth, and you believed him. Right. And so you're throwing away $30 billion. Do you know what we can do with $30 billion a year? Your self-hate bill could build an independent school for every black child on earth. Just on your self-hate. We ain't even touch your Ed Jordan money. That's $2 billion a year. You know what we can do with that Ed Jordan money? We could probably put a quarter of the black youth to work. What about your chicken, turkey, beef, and pork money? That's $800 million a year. Financing your own cancer. Ain't that interesting? We spend $800 million as a people on chicken, turkey, beef, and pork.